Autumn light bled through the alien canopy, scattering amber shards across the forest floor as if the world itself were holding its breath. Captain Ralzek advanced cautiously, each stride measured, each breath filtered through discipline honed by decades of tracking fugitives across the Dominion's harshest worlds. Yet the silence unsettled him in a way no battlefield ever had. It was not the silence of peace, nor the silence of hidden predators waiting to strike. It was a silence shaped by intention, crafted, almost sculpted, as though something unseen had pressed a deliberate stillness into the air. Behind him, Scout Vesh swept a sensor array back and forth, antennae quivering as they struggled to parse coherent data. The device had worked flawlessly during descent, but since entering the forest, its readings drifted into erratic spirals. Vesh muttered a curse, shook the unit, and tried again. The result was identical. No movement detected, no heat signatures recorded, no vibrations traced. To the device, the forest was empty. To Vesh's instincts, it was anything but. Ralzek slowed near a twisted arch of roots and raised a clenched fist, signaling the squad to halt. The hunters obeyed, though not without tension tightening their scaled brows. They had expected a chase, perhaps a confrontation, but not this oppressive quiet. The fugitive should have left tracks or damaged foliage or something to indicate direction. Yet 3 days had passed without a single clue. Even the leaves lay undisturbed, blanketing the ground in a perfect, unbroken mosaic. "He is injured," Vesh whispered, crouching beside Ralzek. "He escaped without supplies, without equipment. He should be desperate by now." "Desperation leaves marks," Ralzek replied, "and he has left none." Another hunter, broad-shouldered Corlin, stepped forward with visible impatience. "Humans are fragile. I have read their dossiers. Their bones snap under pressure, their lungs fail in thin air, their reflexes are inferior. If he is not dead already, he soon will be." Ralzek did not answer immediately. His gaze traced the shadows between the trees, the faint depressions beneath fallen leaves, the subtle variance in airflow that brushed against his skin. Something hid within those quiet spaces, something patient enough not to disturb them. He turned slowly to meet Corlin's confidence with a measured stare. "Fragile things do not survive flights through mountain storms," he said. "Fragile things do not escape containment facilities built to restrain predators far more dangerous than themselves." Corlin's jaw tightened, but he fell silent. Vesh straightened, frustration fading into unease. "Captain, what if he is watching us? We assume he is fleeing. What if that assumption is incorrect?" Ralzek considered the possibility. The human had been silent during captivity, observing everything without revealing motive. His eyes had held a quiet sharpness, a steadiness that made it impossible to determine fear from calculation. Ralzek had dismissed it then as a quirk of the species. Now he wondered whether the fugitive had been studying them long before this hunt began. A faint rustle drifted from a copse of silver-veined ferns. All 3 hunters snapped their weapons toward the sound, forming a defensive arc. The leaves quivered, then stilled. No creature emerged. No shape fled. The moment stretched, taut as wire, until Corlin exhaled sharply in irritation. "He taunts us," Corlin growled, a cornered animal trying to stir panic. Ralzek disagreed. There was no chaotic energy here, no frantic movements or reckless charges. The forest felt too controlled for that. If the human was present, he was not cornered. He was choosing where to stand and where not to, choosing when to be seen and when to vanish. "Not taunting," Ralzek murmured. "Positioning." Vesh swallowed hard. "For what?" Ralzek allowed the silence to answer before he spoke. "For whatever comes next." The shot arrived without warning, silent, surgical, and so distant that none of the hunters detected its source. One moment Corlin stood beside Captain Ralzek, scanning a line of amber-tinted shrubs. The next he collapsed, armor dented by a tiny puncture that seeped dark fluid. No flare, no energy signature, no vapor trail. Just the soft thud of a body meeting the forest floor. Ralzek spun toward Vesh, who was already frantically recalibrating his sensors. The devices insisted nothing had happened. The forest, however, insisted otherwise. Ralzek knelt beside Corlin, examining the wound. The projectile had slipped through a joint in the armor as if placed by a surgeon. The human had not fired in haste. He had waited, studied, and placed a single, irrevocable line of intention between life and death. Ralzek rose with a slow, deliberate breath, feeling a weight settle across his chest. They were not hunting a fugitive. They were intruding on the battlefield of someone who had mastered patience more thoroughly than any Dominion tracker. Vesh whispered, "He should not be able to strike from that range. Not with his primitive tools. He compensates for what he lacks," Ralzek replied. "Humans always have." The remaining hunters tightened their formation, though each step forward carried hesitation. Their prey had made the first move, and the message was unmistakable. He was not running. He was choosing his targets. The air grew colder as a breeze drifted through the canopy, scattering leaves in gentle spirals. Every rustle sounded like distant footfalls. Every shadow felt like an eye. Ralzek signaled a temporary withdrawal to a rocky ridge that offered cover. The group moved quickly, but not silently. Discipline cracked beneath the weight of uncertainty. Once they reached the ridge, Vesh deployed a trio of reconnaissance drones. Their wings shimmered with spectral light as they scattered into the treetops. Ralzek watched their telemetry stream across Vesh's visor. Oscillating lines, distance markers, bursts of spectral color. He expected some anomaly, but he did not expect uniform failure. Each drone reported normal operation until the moment it crossed a particular radius around their position. Then, without warning, its feed simply died. Vesh's voice trembled. "He is interfering somehow." "No," Ralzek murmured. "He has positioned himself where our tools betray us." The captain studied the terrain, rolling ground, thick clusters of roots, natural depressions that formed pockets of perfect cover. Even the coloration of the forest seemed designed to conceal a patient adversary. Ralzek realized the human had not stumbled into safety. He had chosen this space and understood it intimately. A flicker of memory surfaced, those days when the captive sat silently in his containment cell. He never strained against restraints, never shouted, never pleaded. He absorbed everything, storing details like a predator observing the shape of its cage. Ralzek had assumed quiet meant defeat. Now he understood it had been calculation. Another crack echoed across the valley, faint as a snapped twig. A hunter named Trell gasped and fell, a matching puncture through the side of his helmet. Panic shattered the group's unity. One fled behind a boulder, another dropped flat, and Vesh clutched his weapon with shaking hands. Ralzek barked for discipline, though even he felt the tremor in his voice. He forced his thoughts into order. The human remained unseen because he wanted it so. He struck only when advantage was absolute. He had already measured their reactions and was shaping them into predictable patterns. "We must remove his confidence," Ralzek said. "Force him to reposition." Vesh stared at him wide-eyed. "And if he does not need to move?" Ralzek answered with a truth neither wanted. "Then he has already decided how this ends." The forest absorbed his words as though it agreed. Night descended with a slow, deliberate weight, turning the forest into a labyrinth of shadowed latticework. Captain Ralzek led the diminished hunting party along a narrow ravine, choosing it not for safety, but for the force coherence it demanded. Panic had thinned their discipline, and if he allowed open ground, they would scatter like frightened fledglings. Every step felt heavier than the last, though the terrain remained deceptively soft beneath their boots. Ralzek kept his gaze forward, resisting the urge to study the ridgeline where the human might be waiting. If the sniper had repositioned, he had done so without leaving a hint. If he had not moved at all, the truth would be far worse. Vesh trailed behind him, muttering calculations aloud, as if numbers could anchor him. His trembling fingers scraped across his visor, trying to isolate patterns in the silence. But there were no patterns, only a growing certainty that the forest obeyed someone who understood its geometry more intimately than they ever would. Two other hunters followed, their shoulders rigid, their eyes flicking toward any sudden shift of leaves. Ralzek knew they were nearing collapse. He felt it in their footsteps, heard it in their sharp, shallow breaths. They reached a natural alcove where the ravine widened enough to pause. Ralzek gestured for them to form a semicircle. He needed a moment to think, just one moment untouched by fear, but the forest denied him even that. A metallic tap echoed somewhere high above, so soft one could mistake it for a falling branch. Yet the sound carried intention. Vesh froze. The others crouched. Ralzek felt his skin tighten as he recognized it. The faint click of a rifle bolt being gently eased into position. "He wants us to know he's loaded," Vesh whispered. "No," Ralzek replied. "He wants us to understand he has time." Another silence followed, stretching wider, deeper, until it resembled a presence rather than an absence. Ralzek realized the sniper was shaping their behavior with minimal effort. Every sound, every silence, every distant hint of motion served a purpose. The human understood their instinctive responses and exploited them without firing a second shot. The battlefield was not merely physical. It was psychological, and the alien hunters were losing ground on both fronts. Ralzek motioned for them to continue forward, refusing to anchor themselves in a place the human had clearly prepared. They climbed a sloping rise blanketed in crimson leaves that muffled their steps. The forest felt thinner here, branches spaced wider, as though creating a funnel. Ralzek sensed danger, but before he could speak, a sharp cry erupted behind him. One of the hunters, the youngest, fell sideways, clutching his leg where another perfect puncture marked his armor. No one had heard the shot, not even the impact. Vesh dropped beside the wounded hunter, hands shaking uselessly. "This is impossible," he breathed. "He cannot see through this terrain. He cannot angle shots like this." Ralzek felt a grim understanding settle over him. "He does not see terrain," he said softly. "He sees behavior. He predicts movement. He anticipates fear." The wounded hunter groaned, but the sound faded quickly as shock took hold. Ralzek forced himself to stand straighter, even as dread curled around his spine. The human was not chasing them. He was dismantling them meticulously, stripping their formation, unraveling their cohesion, guiding them toward a conclusion he had already mapped. Vesh looked up at him, eyes wide and hollow. "What do we do, Captain?" Ralzek scanned the darkening forest, searching for any path not shaped by their unseen adversary. "First," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice, "we stop reacting." He breathed slowly. "Then we find a way to make him react." Ralzek forced the injured hunter to lean against a twisted root cluster, commanding the others to hold position. The forest had grown unnervingly warm, as though the night itself exhaled against their skin. He studied the terrain with renewed intensity, searching for any sign that might reveal the sniper's vantage point. But every ridge, every tangle of branches, every shadowed crevice looked equally capable of concealing the human. The realization that the enemy could be anywhere or nowhere at all pressed against his thoughts like a tightening vice. Vesh crouched beside the wounded hunter, trying to stabilize him despite knowing the effort was more psychological than practical. His voice trembled as he said, "If he predicts our movements, then staying here will only confirm the pattern he expects." "That is why we cannot stay," Ralzek replied, though he sensed the human already anticipated that conclusion. He could feel it in the stagnant air, the way the forest seemed to tilt inward, funneling them toward a predetermined fate. He motioned for Vesh to help lift the wounded hunter, but before they could take a step, another sound drifted across the clearing. A soft exhale, impossibly close. Ralzek froze. The sniper had moved, or perhaps he had never moved at all, and they were only now entering the perimeter he had prepared with days of observation. The captain scanned the tree line, caught between disbelief and a strange, growing admiration. Few hunters in the Dominion possessed such discipline. Fewer still had the patience to allow fear to ripen before claiming the final strike. The wounded hunter groaned, and Ralzek silenced him with a gentle tap on the shoulder. Every noise risked giving the human a new variable to exploit. The forest stirred again with a faint rustle of leaves, and this time Ralzek sensed the sniper's presence not as a shadow or shape, but as an intention, a precise, calm focus directed at them from somewhere unseen. Vesh whispered, "He wants us to run." "No," Ralzek said. "He wants us to choose. That is how he measures us." The words tasted bitter. The human had turned the hunt into a test, and the captain did not know the passing criteria. He weighed every option with brutal clarity. Forward movement favored the sniper's predictions. Staying still allowed him time to refine them. Splitting up meant death for each fragment. Even surrender seemed futile. The human had already displayed his judgment through his restraint. He had wounded, but not killed when he could have ended them outright. Purpose underlined every action. Ralzek exhaled slowly, accepting a truth he had resisted since the first shot. He is not killing us for survival. He is killing us because we refuse to understand him. Vesh's voice cracked. "Then what now, Captain? We deny him what he expects." Ralzek rose with deliberate slowness, raising his hands above his head. The wounded hunter whimpered, but Ralzek steadied him with a firm grip. He stepped into the open clearing, illuminated only by faint starlight dripping through the canopy. His movements were slow, visible, intentional. Vesh watched with a mixture of horror and awe. The forest waited. "I know you can hear me," Ralzek said, projecting his voice without shouting. "You chose this battlefield. You chose the pace. You chose the fear. But you have also chosen not to kill when you did not need to. That means something." A long, unbroken silence followed. Then a figure emerged from the foliage. Human, camouflaged so completely he seemed sculpted from the forest itself. The sniper stepped forward with the calm of a man who had already won, yet still weighed every motion. His face revealed neither anger nor triumph, only clarity. Ralzek met his gaze and understood the final truth. "We were never hunting you," he said quietly. "We were proving ourselves." The sniper nodded once, almost respectfully, and the forest exhaled.